Tales from the Old Forest. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Chapter 4. There's Always a Choice. Plentyn very nearly jumped out of his skin. It wasn't that the voice was loud or that it was menacing. It wasn't even really a voice at all, but ascending like those from Red, and the tone was warm and friendly. But buried in the shadows, a tall, dark shape had spoken to them with no word of warning, a mysterious creature looming out of the trees at them so unexpectedly, and Plentyn's heart had seemed to skip a beat. On his shoulder, Red let out a squawking chitter and scrabbled round to the back of Plentyn's head, holding tightly onto two tufts of hair and peering over the crown of his head suspiciously. Even Grandma, who Plentyn had always thought was practically unshakable, had her hand resting on her breastbone, having gasped a deep breath of alarm. She let it out with a vitriolic curse. "Why, you daft, fretful fool of a beast," she chided. "What do you mean by lurking around in the gloom like that? You almost sent my old heart into palpitations." "Sorry, so sorry," came the reply from the shadowed shape. "I didn't want to interrupt is all." "Not interrupting is one thing," Grandma replied. "Lurking in the shadows, all ominous-like, is quite another." "It was pretty ominous," agreed Plentyn. "Omnivore," sent Red, not quite understanding the words, but the tone was perfect. "Now who are you there skulking in the shadows?" said Grandma. "Just you come out here this instant." She didn't sound angry, not really, but there was a note in her tone that indicated very strongly that anger might be brought back onto the agenda at any moment if she wasn't taken seriously. The mysterious visitor must have heard that tone too, for they came forward without hesitation. "You were just telling such nice stories is all," the figure explained as they moved into the light. "I didn't want to break up the mood." As the light hit the visitor, Plentyn saw it wasn't quite as tall as he first thought. What Plentyn had taken in the shadows for the top of the creature's head was, in fact, a pair of tall ears swivelling from side to side. Below the ears was a long, narrow face, not too dissimilar from a deer, but that was where the similarity ended. The visitor's height lowered still further as they dropped forward from their hind legs. But where Plentyn had expected them to land on their forelegs, they just hung there, a few short inches off the ground, and Plentyn realized what he was looking at. "You're a kangaroo," he said in delighted surprise. The kangaroo turned to him, its ears flicking in a surprisingly expressive gesture that suggested it was quite aware of what it was, thank you very much. I've never seen a kangaroo in the forest before," stammered Plentyn by way of explanation. "I was beginning to wonder if there were any," he finished. "Well, we're not really deep forest dwellers, see?" the kangaroo replied. "We tend to live in the forest edges and the bushland, where all the trees are a bit thinner and there's room to hop about properly." For Plentyn, used to receiving one-word sendings from Red, the kangaroo's relaxed and easy conversation was a marked difference. He remembered what Grandma had told him about the animals speaking differently, especially those who were a bit bigger, and it suddenly made a bit more sense. "So, what brings you this far into the forest then, Master Roo?" asked Grandma. The commanding tone was no longer present, but nor was she entirely relaxed in how she spoke to the creature. "There's not trouble on the borders again, is there?" she asked, concern etched in the deep valleys of her face. "Trouble on the borders?" asked Plentyn, a sudden flash of his own arrival in the forest coming to mind. In the caverns of his barren memory, he heard the shouts of his parents echoing through the years. "Run, Plentyn, run!" He shivered all over and his skin began to prickle with cold sweat. He must have gone pale because Grandma turned her look of concern on him instead. She took in his state, and it was plain she understood what he was imagining. "Not that sort of trouble, Plentyn," she told him kindly. "Something quite different indeed. Progress, they calls it." She spat on the ground in disgust. "Wanton destruction, I calls it," she went on, and Plentyn had never heard quite such a cold anger to her tone. The green in her eyes was icy and hard, and the purple fiery bright. "I swear, if I must face down any more folk who do not respect the forest, there shall be a reckoning." She said it without heat or rage, but with a cold determination Plentyn found more frightening by far. A steely wave of foreboding seemed to flow out of the diminutive figure, and he found himself taking half a step back from the old woman. No, replied the kangaroo, its ears raised high in alarm at Grandma's tone. Nothing like that. I just heard there were some really great ferns and mosses to eat deeper in the forest is all. Now, Plentyn was not an expert in reading the expressions on animal faces, and he was currently staring at the only kangaroo he had ever seen in the wild. But even he knew that this was a barefaced lie. The kangaroo was hiding something and not doing a very good job of it. From on top of his head, Red redoubled her grip and let out a little growl of distrust. Plentyn was just opening his mouth to tell the kangaroo he didn't believe it when he caught Grandma's eye, and she gave a minute shake of her head. Plentyn occupied himself with trying to untangle Red's grasp on his hair instead, as Grandma went on, all anger now evaporated from her tone. "Well, Master Roo, I'm sure we can find you some of those mosses and ferns you like so much," she said. "They certainly do grow well here where the forest is a bit thicker and the river brings the moisture. You may travel with us if you so desire, and I'm sure we'll come across plenty while we walk." The kangaroo visibly sagged with relief, and Plentyn could tell it was pleased not to have its obvious lie called out. But why was it lying at all, he wondered. "That would be lovely, thank you, Kalineki," sent the kangaroo. Plentyn's own ears pricked up at that name, and he started forward. "Kalinek? Just the name they call me," Grandma interrupted. "Now, where are your manners, boy? You ain't asked our guest his name, have you?" Plentyn dearly wanted to ask more about the strange name Grandma had been called, but Grandma was quite right, he hadn't been polite to their guest. Turning to the kangaroo, he made his proper greeting. "It's a pleasure to have you with us," he told the creature. "My name is Plentyn." He gestured to Red, now perched on top of his head and mercifully having relinquished her hold. "This is Red. How are you called?" he asked. It was a little stilted and formal, but Plentyn was still new to speaking with animals, and he felt it might be better to err on the side of caution rather than risk causing offence to anyone. The kangaroo didn't seem offended, but it did give a little wiggle of its ears that Plentyn took for amusement. "Goodman Plentyn," it began, and Plentyn got the impression he was being made fun of, but perhaps this was just how kangaroos greet people formally. "I am delighted to make your acquaintance and to join you on your journey. My name is Sir Hoppleforth Brushlover, roamer of the Great Plains." It bowed deeply, sweeping one foreleg across its midriff, its long snout nearly brushing the floor as it did so. Now Plentyn knew he was being made fun of, but as the kangaroo raised its head back up, he saw its ears wiggling again in amusement, and it actually closed one eye in a wink. Plentyn was shocked. He'd never known animals could wink, but this was far too deliberate not to be. Before he could think what to say, the kangaroo went on, this time in a far less formal tone. "I'm just tweaking your tail, mate. You were heaping on the formality a bit too much there. Nice to meet you, Plentyn." With that, Plentyn's uncertainty broke, and he decided he would quite like this kangaroo with his playful, light-hearted tone. "Is your name really Sir Hoppleforth Brushlover?" he asked, a grin painting his face. "It is indeed, mate," the kangaroo confirmed. "Well, not the Sir part, but my name really is Hoppleforth. You can call me Hopper, though, if you like." "Hopper it is," Plentyn agreed, and raised his eyes skyward, trying to catch sight of Red. "Won't you say hello to Hopper, Red?" he asked. The squirrel stayed where she was, that small growl drifting softly out of her again. She dropped down onto all fours to stare meaningfully at Hopper. "Stay away from acorns," she sent, her tone rich with menace. "Acorns, mine." And with that, she skittered down to Plentyn's other shoulder, the one farthest away from Hopper, and began grooming her fur as if he no longer existed. There was an awkward silence between Hopper and Plentyn, neither knowing quite what to say next, until Grandma broke it. "I don't believe our Red here has quite forgiven you for startling her, Hopper. I'm sure she'll come round in time, providing you stay away from her acorns, that is." She let out a chuckle, and it was like a warm breeze that set them all at their ease. "Now," Grandma went on, "we mustn't stay around here lollygagging and exchanging the time of day any longer. We've a journey to be getting on with. Now follow me." With that, she turned on her heel and strode off confidently, humming one of her tunes under her breath. Plentyn strode on behind her, Red perched on his shoulder, and Hopper loping easily along by his side. The kangaroo turned out to be an excellent conversationalist, and the two of them chatted back and forth easily. Red was still determinedly ignoring Hopper until she was distracted by a hazel tree that looked like it might contain nuts and darted off into the branches. "So, you know why I'm here," Hopper began, and Plentyn kept his disbelief at his new friend's story to himself. "But what brings you and your grandma out into the forest today?" Plentyn noticed how Hopper stepped lightly over the name he would usually call Grandma and made a mental note to ask more later, but for now he answered the question. "We're looking for kindness," he went on, then realised that didn't quite make sense. "I mean, we're looking for acts of kindness, or stories about it anyway." He realised it sounded a bit odd when he said it out loud, and he was somehow embarrassed and felt a hot surge run up his spine. "It's Grandma's idea," he shrugged. "And an excellent idea that makes it, I would say," said Grandma, turning to face them both. "What young Plentyn is neglecting to inform you of is that, as his guardian and caregiver, I am attending to his emotional and spiritual well-being. This, good sirs, is an educational extravaganza." She pointed her small nose up at the sky, a picture of self-conscious virtue, and turned away from them dramatically, falling back into step. Plentyn felt the flush of embarrassment from before burn ever brighter and set about mentally berating himself. Why had he felt the need to try and excuse the reason for their journey? Grandma was doing all of this for him, to help him, and he tried to explain it away like he was following some mad old woman's wishes. He felt his ears burning in shame and anger, and was glad Red wasn't next to them lest she scorch herself. Hopper broke into his thoughts. "Hey mate, it's okay, you know," he said in a kindly tone. "I shouldn't have pried, should I? This is clearly your business. You don't need my big nose in it, do you?" Plentyn couldn't think of anything to say, but he did feel himself calm just a little. "Your grandma is quite the character, isn't she?" Hopper went on, trying to change the subject. "She's a bit of a legend." "She's not my grandma," Plentyn replied, cutting Hopper off. "Come again, mate?" Hopper asked. "But you said—" "She's not my grandma," Plentyn replied again hotly. He knew the kangaroo was only trying to make conversation, but he'd stumbled onto a sensitive subject, and all the angry thoughts of a moment before were suddenly back, and they had brought friends. "I call her Grandma, but that's just a name I call her. She seems to have a lot of names from a lot of different people. That's mine. I don't have any family." He kicked out at a nearby tree root as he passed it, his eyes smarting with tears. "Plentyn, my lad," said Grandma in a tone of immense displeasure, "you are being rude to our guest, and I hope I did not just hear you kick a tree in your anger." She didn't turn round to face them this time. She didn't have to. Plentyn could hear the disappointment in her tone. Grandma held great store by politeness, and had often told Plentyn of the importance of it to guests and strangers. "All creatures, be they high or low, carry the spark of creation within them," she had told him, "and shame on anyone who holds themselves higher by not respecting that." Plentyn felt the anger drain out of him, leaving only shame in its wake. He stopped walking and turned to Hopper, his words tripping over themselves as he tried to explain. I'm really sorry," he stammered. I get really... Grandma's trying to..." He took a deep breath, frustrated that all the words he tried to explain didn't quite seem right. "Hey," Hopper said, interrupting his train of thought. "It's okay, mate. You don't have to explain if you don't want to. You got angry, that happens. You apologised. It's okay. Really." The gentle tone in Hopper's sending somehow seemed like a soft breeze, blowing away all the chaos and clutter in his mind. He looked into the creature's dark eyes and found them deep with understanding. He took another deep breath. "I really am sorry," he began. "I get angry sometimes, mostly at myself, but sometimes people get caught in the crossfire, you know?" Hopper dipped his head in a nod, his ears flicking gently. "Grandma's trying to teach me about kindness because she thinks it might help. That it might help me remember my parents too. I don't really remember them much." He finished, glad to have got the words out properly. His eyes were burning with the threat of tears, and Plentyn was grateful that, for now, they didn't seem to have arrived. "Oh, mate, I'm sorry," said Hopper in the same gentle tone, and Plentyn looked at the ground, unable to meet those soulful eyes again, knowing the tears would definitely come if he did. "That sounds tough. Losing loved ones is... That sounds tough. There was a long moment of silence, and Plentyn was surprised that it didn't feel awkward, just companionable. Now his anger had abated, he could hear the sounds of a nearby stream singing softly, and the birds chattering to each other in the canopy above. He was aware that Grandma had stopped walking ahead of them, but she made no comment, and was leaning her shoulder against a tree trunk, idly watching Red as she skittered around the trees above them. "You know," Hopper ventured after a brief while, "I think I might have a story that suits your theme, if you want to hear it." He looked over his shoulder at Grandma as if seeking permission, and the old woman nodded. Plentyn glanced up, stifling a shake in his voice. "That would be great, thank you. Is it a story from the kangaroos?" "It is indeed," Hopper confirmed, a slightly playful note entering his tone. "This is one of our oldest and most important stories. My old grandma used to tell this to my mum, and my mum told it to me, and I like to tell it as well." It wasn't possible for there to be a hitch in Hopper's voice because he wasn't really talking, but somehow there was a slight hesitation in his sending. Plentyn wasn't sure if it was just him still being new to conversing with animals, though, and Hopper carried on smoothly. "You can judge for yourself whether this is a true story or not, but I swear that this is how it really happened many years back in the kangaroo history. Long, long ago, before the times when menfolk ruled the world, a mother kangaroo was grooming her joey near the banks of a river. In those days, the mamaroos did not have pouches to carry their young and would tend to them out in the open. Her joey liked to listen to the water burble as the mama tended the baby's fur, and she would sing to him and tell him stories about all the fish in the stream. On this particular day, though, an old wombat staggered towards them out of the trees. Now, in those days, wombats weren't so endangered as they are now, but they were still a rare sight, and treated with great respect and kindness whenever they were found. "Oh, goodness," the mama kangaroo whispered to her baby. "This wombat is in trouble. He doesn't look well at all." As the wombat grew closer, the mother kangaroo could hear him sniffling with tears, and he seemed to be in great distress and sadness, so the mother's heart broke for him. "Excuse me, brother wombat, do you need help?" she called to him. Who said that?" cried the wombat, clearly shocked. "Is someone there?" The motheroo realised that the wombat must be very old indeed, and didn't have much vision left, so she called out again. "I called you," she said. "I'm a mamaroos, and with me is my joey. Would you like to come and sit with us?" "I'm an old, half-blind fool of a creature," the wombat lamented. "Nobody wants me around them. You're very kind to offer, but you best leave me on my way." The kangaroo, though, couldn't bear to see an old wombat struggle on alone. Besides, it was near a river, and might fall in and come to some mischief. "Nonsense, brother wombat. I shan't hear of it. You come and sit over here with my joey and me. We'll be your friends, and we'll show you where the tastiest grass grows, and we'll help you get fresh water from the stream." Telling her joey to stay put, she went to the wombat and led him gently to the juiciest grass in the plains, and helped him to find the fresh river water, clutching onto her strong tail for safety. "Oh, thank you," the old wombat sighed with pleasure. "I feel better than I have in weeks. You're the first creature to show me kindness in such a long time." The mamaroos smiled warmly, happy to see the old creature feeling better. "But where is your joey? I'd be delighted to make his acquaintance if that would be okay." The mamaroo called for her joey, turning to look where she'd left him. But he wasn't there. She had told him to stay put, but he was at that age all young ones reach where they can't help but ramble and explore, and he'd wandered off again. She ran back and forth all up and down the river, calling out for him. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but it still scared her to her very soul and filled her with worry. Eventually, she spotted him sleeping softly under a gum tree. Seeing he was safe and not wanting to wake him, she darted back to tell the old wombat that all was well. But something was moving in the bush the old wombat had arrived from. A hunter, silently stalking the old creature. The hunter had his boomerang raised to throw, its smooth slicing edges slick and deadly. The mamaroo froze in place. Everything around her seemed to crystallize. She could run, could sprint away faster than the hunter could ever chase her, swoop up her joey and be gone. but that would leave the helpless old wombat to its death. She had welcomed him to sit with her, had shared her food and her drink. She had told him that she would be her friend. She could not leave him to die. Acting quickly, the Roo began stomping her long, strong feet on the dry branches and twigs under her feet. As the snaps and cracks rang out in the silence, the hunter turned towards her and took his eyes off the helpless wombat. "Run!" she screamed to her new friend. Quicker than she possibly could have believed, the old wombat was up and off like a shot. He ran wildly, not able to see where he was going, but boy did he do it fast, and he was away and safe. He needn't have bothered though, because the hunter didn't care about a measly wombat anymore, not when it had a full-grown kangaroo instead. Taking aim, the hunter hurled his boomerang, and the mama Roo took off across the plains as fast as she could. There was a whistling just above her head as the hunter's boomerang whipped by her a second time, and she let out a little shriek of fear. She hopped on hard and fast and scooped her Joey up from beneath the gum tree just as the boomerang swiped past again. This time it was so close that it nicked the very tip of her ear. Her heart was hammering in her chest, but still she bounded away, her breath heaving raggedly in her throat. On and on the chase went, and at last the Roo could go no further. She had run so hard. Her Joey was a dead weight in her arms, and she was too tired to go any further. To her left she saw a cave, and with a final desperate bound she leapt inside and collapsed into the dirt, panting and praying to be saved. And would you believe it? The hunter ran past her cave. He didn't seem to spot it at all. The Roo stayed inside, clutching her Joey tightly to her chest, her heart still thumping. But he did not return. She waited there all night, and finally, as dawn broke, she knew it was safe to venture out again. Then she hunted for the old wombat to make sure that it was safe, and she found it, but not as she had expected. Where she'd left an old, half-blind wombat, she found a mystical, glowing creature instead. "Who was it?" asked Plentyn, quite caught up in the story. At some point, without him noticing, Red had returned to listen and was leaning forward to hear the story. "No one can truly say," Hopper replied. "Some say it was the old god Biame. Some say it was a tree spirit from one of the truly ancient trees. I don't know for sure, but I do know that it smiled warmly at the mama Roo." "Thank you, kind friend," the glowing wombat said. "You showed me great kindness, and you kept me safe even when it put you in danger. How can I possibly repay you for your actions?" Well, the mama Roo didn't know what to say. It was all such a shock, so much so that she almost dropped the Joey from her arms. And then it struck her. "If only I had some way to keep my Joey with me till he's big enough to look after himself, that would be perfect," she said. "That way I could eat and move about and help strangers and even run from danger, and I wouldn't have to worry about my Joey." "Done," said the old wombat, and he instructed her to go down below to where the great eucalyptus trees grow and peel just a few of the long strips of bark away. Then, before her eyes, he wove the strips into an apron and tied it around her waist. "This will certainly help," the Roo replied, being polite as she could, for in truth, the gift was slightly underwhelming, and she was sure that it would probably break before long. But the old wombat wasn't done yet. He laid his paws on the apron, and as he did, it transformed into soft kangaroo fur. The mama Roo felt beneath her paws and ran her hands all over, and it truly grew from her very flesh. Now she had a pouch in which her Joey could be carried in perfect safety. "Oh," she exclaimed, no need for politeness any longer. "This is better than I could have dreamed. Thank you so much." But at that moment, another thought struck her. She was far from the only creature who was hunted and had to carry her young around with her. She knew many others who would find this just as helpful. "I thank you, Brother Wombat, for your kindness. But might I ask you bless the others like me just as you have done for me? I know they too could benefit from this, and I would hate to think that they might still be at risk when I alone am safe." The old wombat looked at her with a warm smile, bowled over by her kindness in thinking of others at all times, and granted her request. So with that, all kangaroo mothers, all the wallaby mothers, all the quokka mothers and koala mothers, and even the wombat mothers were gifted with the pouches for which we are all so well known. Hopper's story came to an end, and for a moment there was a brief pause while they reflected on it. "Well told, Master Roo," Grandma chimed in. "An excellent tale." "Thank you, Kalineki," Hopper replied. "I thought you might like it." "Indeed I do," she confirmed, and there was a mischievous twinkle in her brilliant eyes. "And a salutary lesson in the education of young Plentyn, I'd wager." She turned to Plentyn. "Tell me, lad, is there aught you can take from this tale that tells you of kindness?" Plentyn thought for a moment. "Well, I think what struck me most was that the mother had a choice. Lots of choices, really. But in each one she could think about herself, or she could think about the other people, the wombat, her Joey, all the creatures who should get the same gift. And she chose others." "Precisely, my lad," Grandma agreed, smiling warmly and clapping her hands together in pleasure, the wooden bangles on her wrists clicking and clacking as she did. "There is always a choice. But answer me this now, could she have carried out any acts of kindness if she had only thought about herself?" Plentyn thought back over the story. "No," he said eventually. "To show kindness to others, she couldn't be thinking about herself." He didn't even get to finish the sentence because Grandma was already clapping her hands again and had broken out in a little jig in front of them. "That's right, my boy," she called out as she danced. "You can't show kindness when you're thinking of yourself," Grandma went on. "It's something that flows out of you, you see, and into those around you. And to do that, you have to see those around you and take note of them. Be aware of them. Be looking for those in need of it." She'd stopped her dance now, but her voice still rang with music and merriment, clearly pleased at how well Plentyn had grasped the point. She moved nearer and sat down next to him on a patch of grass he'd chosen, stroking Red's fur between her ears as she did so. "It did seem to put the Mamaroo in danger, though," Plentyn said. "More danger than she might have been in already, I mean." "Oh, no one ever said showing kindness was safe," said Grandma. "Far from it, in fact. A person who chooses to think of others before themselves and seek out opportunities to show kindness may find themselves more in danger than many a person who only thinks on their own wants. You have cause to know that better than most, don't you, lad?" She nudged her shoulder kindly against his and motioned towards Red, whose small head was nodding forward in tiredness. "We'll make camp here for the night," announced Grandma, giving the trees about them a cursory inspection, "and tomorrow I'll take you to find some folk who truly know the meaning of danger when it comes to doing kindness." She turned to Hopper. "I do hope you'll stay with us, Master Roo," she asked. "I think you're a fine influence on the boy, and you've more than earned it with that fine story." That night, after they had eaten and were gathered around the fire waiting for sleep to claim them, Plentyn reflected on what Grandma had said. Red was curled up on his chest, sleeping soundly, and Hopper was stretched out to his side, his long feet warming near the fire. "Kindness flows out of you and into those around you," Grandma had said. He pulled up the hood of his jumper and wondered about his parents, and what acts of kindness they might have sent flowing out into him that he could no longer remember. Surely there must have been a great deal of them, because Grandma was convinced he'd been shown plenty as a child, and that was why he had acted to save Red on instinct. He looked at the small shape stirring softly on his chest as she dreamed, and was very glad his parents had passed on those lessons, even if he couldn't remember them. As his eyes finally closed in sleep, he got a bright, warm flash of memory. He was small, much smaller than he was now. His arms were raised high above his head, each hand held tightly by one of his parents as they swung him back and forth, all three of them giggling gleefully. He wore bright red Wellington boots, which swung out before him as his parents swung him through the fallen autumn leaves. They were together, and they were happy. Plentyn slept in peace. Thanks for listening. Tales from the Old Forest was a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story editor was Miriam Sarin. Intro music was Adventure is Calling by Vens Adams. Outro music was Conquest of Paradise by Simon Folwar. It was a Parable Arts production.